It's John, I'm your guide for today, and I'll be taking you around this paddock. Before I start, we've got some important messages from our sponsors. You can imagine what it's like getting insurance on a place like this. And before I take you around, I've got to take you through a statement which I have to do verbatim. I'm not allowed to change it in any way. So please try not to fall asleep, because I find it dents my confidence for later on. You have all been provided with a hard hat. This must be worn at all times, and it's a condition of your joining this tour that you wear it. If you're unwilling to wear a hard hat, then one of my fellow guides will escort you to the surface. Eating, drinking and smoking are not permitted at any time during the tour. The floor of the bunker is wet and uneven in places. It is really quite dry, so don't worry, you should be fine. Please watch where you are walking and take care when using the stairs. Please hold the handrails at all time. If you suffer from any medical conditions such as claustrophobia, epilepsy, asthma, high blood pressure, hypoglycemia, or you're prone to fits or fainting, please let one of us know before we start. Please do not leave the main tour and wander off on your own. Having said that, if you want to take photographs, we know people like to take photographs where it's a little bit more empty. Taking a picture of a big group of people isn't that appealing. If you want to hang back, stay with one of the guides and you'll be fine. Many of the rooms have debris on the floor and are not to be entered. Please don't cross the hazard tapes. A guide will be at the rear of the party at all times. Anyone in a tab except, where is he?
Except me.
Except that bloke there who just came in his own high-vis. It's his fashion choices. Throughout the bunker there's extensive mould growth. It's perfectly safe, but please don't touch any of the mould or fungus. And don't touch any of what it says here are stalactites. See these up here? They're calcite straws, and they're made from water filtering through the concrete structure and leaving behind these structures. Don't touch them because they're incredibly fragile and they'll break, and they give the place quite a nice ambience. So please don't touch them or they will break off. There are no rats or nasty things in this bunker apart from the guides. Firefighting equipment is located at entry level and at each end of the corridor on both lower levels. I think fire is a low risk, but it's there if we need it. In the event of an emergency evacuation, or if we're unable to use the main stairs for some reason, please follow the instruction of the guide who will lead you out via an emergency exit located at the south end of the bunker. It says guide to indicate which direction this is. It's that way. Is that correct? It's that way. There you go, it's that way. I do know where I am once I start walking around, but I need a pointer. If you feel unwell, or if you just don't want to continue, just let us know and we'll take you up to the surface. It's not for everybody, we realise that. The tour does involve using a narrow spiral staircase. If you're unable to use these stairs, there is a main staircase and you can use that instead. Just let us know and we'll take you down the alternative route. Those with small children or mobility problem must not use the spiral staircase. Please ask us to use the other. At the end of the tour, please return your wristbands. You don't want to be left down here. We only open it once every 6 months. And the tour will last for approximately 50 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just bleep them out. If we're going to cover them later, then I'll tell you the answer, or I'll tell you that I'm going to answer it later. Okay? Hand up already. God, that's keen. All right.
I'm fascinated by the stalactites. How comes, what causes the rapid growth? Because when you go to caves normally they tell you, it's taken so many millions of years.
I did say they're not stalactites, they're calcite straws. They're very, very, very thin. Yes. And what happens is they leach out limestone, which we pound up to make concrete. That forms the straws, and it's just that they're so thin that they grow so quickly. You're quite right. These would in fact grow into proper stalactites if you gave them, I don't know, geologists here, 3,000 years, something like that. But we're not going to be waiting to watch any grow, but that's why they grow so quickly. Okay, boring bit over. I'll park that up there. So, this is Paddock, okay, and what we're in now is the Cabinet War Room 2. Paddock was its code name. And has anyone here been to the Cabinet War Rooms down on Storey's Gate on Whitehall? Yes? This is the counterpart bunker. And this was built because Storey's Gate really isn't very strong. It was strengthened at the beginning of the war with 9-inch timbers in the ceiling. You can imagine 9-inch timbers aren't going to do a great deal to resist a high explosive bomb. And this was always seen as a weakness. They kept on strengthening it throughout the war. But this was built to be impervious to the biggest weapons that the Germans had available at the time. And if we'd been standing here when this place opened in June of 1940, we'd be in one of the most secret and well-protected places left in the Western world. Here we see the site as it was until this area over here was redeveloped. Now this is Neville Court. I don't know if you noticed the big luxury block of flats down here as you came in. That's this structure here, and that was actually used as accommodation for this bunker when it was operational. And this flat building over here is the structure that you've just come through, although of course these days it looks nothing like this. This little extension on the back, I don't know if you can see that, I'll try and put a light on it, just there. Okay, that's the only bit that remains. The rest of it was knocked down to build all the housing above us, and what they did was they clad that structure in the same bricks as the housing to stop making it stand out so much, because while we all find it fascinating to come down and visit this place, it's probably not ideal to have next door if you're trying to sell your house. So Network Housing were given this site by Brent Council, and one of the conditions of getting the site was that they preserve this place and that they make it available twice a year, and that's what we do now. Oh, that's very good because we can come in here, but it did have a downside. You'll notice it's wet in here. When they were building the house above, they did manage to damage the waterproofing above, so it does fill with water. And when we got here around 2000, 2001, there was quite a lot of water on the lower level which had to be pumped out. Now that's done, it's like this. And everything you see is pretty much as it's been left. This isn't a preserved space in any sense, it's just what happens when you let nature reclaim a structure back. So you'll notice there are some modern features like the safety lighting, the no smoking signs, the fire exits, etc. But apart from that, it's all as was when it was stripped out. So we'll start off by going this way, where we'll visit the air conditioning plant, if you'd like you to do their jobs. This is the first piece of evidence we're going to see today, and this is an air conditioning plant. Now, you notice the temperature down here is quite temperate. It's about 50, 55 degrees. Underground spaces always normalise out to the average temperature of the surface. So, for instance, if you go to a cave system in Barbados, which I'm lucky enough to do a couple of years ago on holiday, the average temperature down there at a couple of hundred feet is about 86 degrees because that's the average surface temperature. But what that doesn't take into account is that this was the working place for an awful lot of people, about 150 people, the War Cabinet and all their supporting staff and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all their staff. Put that many people in a space this confined and the temperature will start to creep up pretty rapidly. Now, as on top of the people, each of which is quite an efficient heater, there's an awful lot of plant down here as well, mainly the telecoms equipment, which all generate a lot of heat, and it needed quite a lot of cooling. So they fitted, you see this one's marked number 1, this is your state-of-the-art 1940s air conditioning kit. They fitted twin ones so that it's a resilient system. If one breaks down, they don't lose the facilities, they switch that off, turn the other one on, and everything continues as before. And you can see some evidence here as well that this is a protected structure, because if you've got a bunker like this, people are pretty safe. I'll talk about how safe we are in a minute from outside direct attack. But the other thing you can do is have a nice safe box and everybody inside it is dead if you gas them. And this here is a gas shutter. So this allows the people in here to go into a sort of lockdown mode where they're no longer taking any air from the surface, or not just this one. This allows them to modify how it flows. But it's always designed so that you have the choice of whether you take air from the outside or you go into lockdown and recirculate. And that's if there's a gas attack, the warnings go out from outside, everything can be closed down. Now I mentioned that we're safe and that this was built to be impervious to the biggest German bombs. I think at the time the biggest was a 500 kilo at the beginning of the war. Above our heads we've got about 3 feet of reinforced ferroconcrete. Okay, so that's up to about here on me. And above that is about 30 to 40 feet of soil. Now the whole structure was built by cut and cover. Consider where we are, in quite a central site. That must have been an enormous undertaking because they dug this colossal hole, they built a big concrete box in the middle of it, and then they tipped all the soil back in. And as far as we know, despite the fact that this must have accounted for literally thousands of lorry movements, the Germans weren't aware that this was being built during the time that it was. Now, part of the reason why this site may have been chosen is there's very good communications links nearby. We've got the Willesden Junction for train, we've got the North Circular, or its precursors, just to the north of us here. And that gave them lots of routes for getting rid of spoil. But I still think it's amazing that you could dig a hole this big and not actually get picked up. The site while they were building was heavily camouflaged, and it was covered in netting to obscure it from aerial observation, but nonetheless it's still quite a feat. So now we're going to move on and see the other aspect of air handling. If you'd like to back out down that corridor there, go down there and bear to the left, and there's a little dingy room full of rusty machines. Use of water and any contaminants in it just get caught in the water, taken to the bottom and drained away. They're apparently quite effective, although I don't know how they tested that. Construction made out of reinforced concrete, and we believe it also had a shock absorbing layer in the middle made of shingle. Now, we don't have design drawings for this structure, so we can't say that definitively, but it was a very common feature of defensive architecture in the 40s. And the idea behind it is simple. If you have a monolithic structure, a solid block of concrete, and you hit it very hard on this side with an explosion, it has a rather unfortunate effect of sending big spalls of concrete off this side at supersonic speeds. Now, this is well known in tanks. Tanks get hit on the side, big chunks of metal break off the inside, everybody inside tank dead. Tank's out of order, no matter that the shell hasn't actually been pierced. So they developed this to do exactly the same thing. And it was very successful. We know of at least a couple of instances where structures like this took direct hits. Our inventor on the Isle of Wight was hit by a bomb. The command post of the radar station there was hit by a bomb, and the worst that anybody inside got was damage to their hearing because the thing had gone off right on the roof. Unfortunately, if it did fail, it was quite bad as well. RF Detling in Kent took a direct hit on its operations room in 1940-41, and the lower layer cracked, the shingle poured out, and everybody in the command centre was drowned. So it didn't always work, but that's what we think it is. And as I've just said to my friend here who's in the construction industry, pouring this much concrete at the time in a single pour would have been very, very difficult because concrete heats up as it cures. We're going to go through into this room now where we'll see the second feature that you often... This space in here, and what I have my hand resting on, this is a big diesel electric set. This provides the bunker with a self-contained power supply in the event that the surface facilities are wiped out. You've got to remember that in the 1940s there was no such thing as precision bombing. If you wanted to take out a target, what you did was you took several thousand tons of bombs and you dropped them pretty much piecemeal over the whole area. To try and hit a facility like this, they broadly expected that there would be a massive bombardment. And what that does to the surface is it takes out everything on it, especially fragile lines. Now, some of the power supplies coming into here were buried, but this gives the place a self-contained power supply while they fix things on the surface. And it consists of this big diesel engine over here. One of our visitors once claimed he could get it running again, although I think he'd be doing quite well to manage that. And this is an electric generator on the end. And this would have given power for, I think, this little billy tank up here gives about 2 hours, and there's one on the surface that gives a few days that would have been in the surface block. Which actually reminds me, quite a lot of the facilities for this bunker were in the surface block. As we go around, you'll notice there are no toilets down here. They didn't exist because obviously you have to pump everything back up. We won't go into the details of that, but it's quite unpleasant. So they had all of the toilet facilities up on the surface with perhaps some emergency stuff down here. And there's some lovely switchgear on the way out. If you look around in here, you'll see lots of brands which, if you have anything to do with building or electrical work, you'll recognise. Most of these companies are still going. I think the engines are Perkins. You can see Maker's Plate on most of these, but I'm not sure that I can on that. Anyone?
Crompton.
Yeah, Crompton. Right. And there's some Simplex, and there's AEG, and various other ones. But what I find surprising about this space is that I drive a little Audi diesel. And it's quite noisy if it sits in my drive. It'll wake my wife up if I leave early in the morning. They make quite a noise. Now this little baby going at full chat, I would imagine, roars. And you notice we've got no sound deadening in here whatsoever, and even better than that, this may drip on some of you, we've got unattenuated thin steel sheet ducting that goes to the rest of the bunker. If this was wound up, I would imagine it was impossible to hear yourself think in the other rooms, never mind do any productive work. But there she is. And then behind us we've got some more aircon kit over there. Number 2 it says there, and some more switchgear here. Any questions about this space?
How did they keep everything secret from the staff of all these companies?
The staff of... Well, I really don't know. I mean, I would imagine that they didn't know where the end product of their work was going. one thing that is worth mentioning, you've seen the stairs and the big staircase that we first came in in. This is quite big. How'd you get it in? No answering from you. You work in construction, project management.
You leave a hole and then fill it in later.
Sorry?
You leave a...
But that would give you a weak point in your structure. You bring it in bits, yeah, it's another idea. It was actually built entirely in situ on the original slab. They dug the hole, put the slab in, put the machine mountings in, fit this, and then the rest of the bunker goes in around it. And that's true for most really big components. And it's a technique you again see in the modern era when they were building the Cold War stuff. Okay, what's the next room? It's the map room, isn't it?
Map room, yeah.
Okay, fine. We're going to go out of here, go left down the corridor, and into the map room. If you just follow the guides, I'll join you in there in a minute. As you go in, watch your footing, because there are cable channels in the floor. It's also quite muddy. So they've been plotting what was happening that they were hearing out there, deciding what to do about it here, and then instructing their forces and out through the chain of command. Tragically, until I think it was the mid-70s, the maps on these walls were in situ. Somebody who worked at the post office decided that they were getting in the way for some reason, although they were flat on the walls, took them outside and burned them. So a different attitude to heritage in a different time, which we can only go about now, but a real no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. So we had, on the outside wall, we had the general, let's say, the macro level of what was going on. So we have maps on here showing the Atlantic, what was happening in the Philippines, what was happening in North Africa at a very large scale. And then down the centre, I warned you about the cableways on the way in. Down the centre, this would have been large tables, and they would have been used to display more theatre scale what was going on. So you might have had an individual battle or whatever, but the smaller scale would be done down here, and that would be plotted at a battle or an arena level. We do have visitors occasionally who come in and tell us that these can't possibly be contemporary, these fluorescent light fittings, because, as everybody knows, fluorescent lights weren't developed in the 1940s. Well, if you're building the command centre to run the war for the free world, that tells you it really was under wraps, because even the most secret stuff you do get pictures of. We've got members who spend their life up at the National Archives at Kew, going through dusty old files and trying to find things. And the things they turn up are frankly astonishing sometimes, that they are sub-secret things. But here, nothing. Maybe it was just because it was one of many at the time, maybe it's because it was so secret, but certainly nothing persists. So we can't say with any certainty what was here before. We can only show you what is here and interpret from that. Okay, this is the centre of operations, and this would have been provided seating for 30 people. It would have been laid out, as far as we can tell from contemporary notes, with 2 long tables through here, and Ian here is standing where Mr. Churchill would have sat. We can't say what in here is contemporary, although the light fittings are. Sorry, so I'm contradicting myself. That hat stand appears to be. And this rather curious double-layered aircon. You see they've doubled it up. We can only imagine that's because everybody in the 1940s smoked, and with this place with 30 people in it, probably kicked up a right old fug. Let me tell you a little bit about Paddock and how it was used. A lot of you will have come here today because of the association with Churchill's name. Certainly that's what generates a great deal of interest. I'm involved with a lot of structures very like this, but without his thumbprint on them they become a lot less appealing. He didn't like the place very much. He came here in total twice. And the story of how he did so is quite interesting on its own. He was involved in the planning for Paddock, and he knew that he needed a secure citadel to run the country from in the event that Whitehall was wiped out, but didn't appear terribly interested in it until the morning of the 8th of
September.
8th of September, yes, 1940. Anyone get the significance of that date? 8th of September 1940.
Britain.
No,
That's the day when all the RAF was up, isn't it?
it's the Blitz. It's the beginning of the London Blitz. At tea time on the 7th of September, the bombs started falling on the east end of London, and they continued to fall through the night with huge property damage and loss of life. And Churchill, in response to this, didn't go to the East End as his biographer claimed. He came here to make sure that he had something in place. If that bombing had moved into central London, he would have been using this place pretty smartish. So he came up here and just made sure that he was comfortable with the arrangements. And very soon after that, on the 29th, he said, the 29th of September, he said, "I think it's important that Paddock be broken in. Thursday next, therefore, the Cabinet will meet there. At the same time, every department should be encouraged to try a preliminary move with skeleton staff." And so it came that the War Cabinet met here, they actually in session, the minutes reflect that, on Thursday the 10th of October. And Churchill said afterwards, "We held a meeting at Paddock, far from the light of day, and each minister was asked to inspect and satisfy himself about his sleeping and working apartments. We celebrated this occasion by a vivacious luncheon and then returned to Whitehall." We can all interpret what a vivacious luncheon entailed with his rather legendary drinking. But that was it. That was the last time he came here. He was planned to come here on one further occasion the following March, when the Australian Premier came here to give a 40-minute presentation on the Australian readiness for war, or not readiness for war, sorry, war effort. And the Cabinet met, but Churchill cried off, citing a bronchial cold. So he never came on that third occasion. And at the time, this was, the heat was off, really. The dark hours, when I said at the beginning, if you were here, you'd be in one of the best protected and secret places in the world. That was a dark time. June 40, France had just fallen, and the world outside was a pretty scary place. Around 41, of course, Hitler made his huge strategic error of going to invade Russia. And after that, the heat came off us progressively. So this lost its purpose somewhat. But other facilities were prepared alongside that were closer to London. A lot of people ask, why here? Why so close to London? Well, there was a plan to take central government and its supporting departments out to the West Country in the area around Corsham, near Bristol. I don't know if any of you know there are very, very extensive limestone mines down there, which remain to this day, and there was a plan to use them and other local facilities to take government out of London. But Churchill always resisted this, and he felt that to leave London would be tantamount to surrender or abandoning his people in the face of adversity. And he was using the example of the French government, who, after the Nazis invaded, moved progressively to Tours and then to Bordeaux, and precipitated a collapse of morale among the French people. So he said, we won't leave, and he stayed in London, and he remained true to that right throughout the war. So even into the divers period in 43, when the V1 weapons started arriving, he stayed in London. So, we're going to go back upstairs now, but just before we do, on the way out, there's a little room on your left. Have a look in there and see if you can guess what that might be. Especially have a look at the walls. Space as a social club and for various other things. Well, this is one of the rooms where you see layered history or layered archaeology, because it was used for one thing, then another, and I'll point out a few features of that as we go. But this was used at one point for the Post Office Dramatic Society as a rehearsing space, and also as a social club. Although I can't, well, I suppose if you put some flashing lights on, it does take on the look of a nightclub, but doesn't it terribly appealing to me? Are we done? Are we in? Yeah? Right. This over here, the wine rack, this is a main distribution frame, an MDF, and this is, I mentioned earlier on, you see protective features, you see air handling, and you see telecommunications. This is the hub of telecommunications for Paddock. In the 40s, this was a massively connected place by any standards. I mean, telephones weren't rare at the time, they'd been around for a long time, but they were by no means very, very common either. And this place had connections in their hundreds coming in. And this is where they're all distributed within the bunker complex. This is one of two exchanges. There's another very small one just outside the cabinet war room downstairs. And we will have a little look around the back of this for anyone that's interested. There's very little remaining artefacts in this bunker, you've got to say. There's very little evidence of what it was used for. But one of the very, very small hints is around the back of here. If anyone would like to come around, you can have a look at it. Anyone got a big light? Yeah, can you do that? I won't go around there. I'd go in one side and come out the other. So try going in that way and then filtering through if you want. You'll see a few boxes. Each of these frames, you can see through, those of you who are outside, each of these frames here is the header for a number of connections. So an incoming line and outgoing lines, and these were the switching boxes. And on some of these boxes, we've got marks that indicate where they're connected to. So for instance, we've got, oh, there you go, 100 pairs to MDF sub-basement, 100 pairs, 100 cables, in other words, going to the main distribution frame downstairs. And down here we've got CWRARW written in red on white, and that's the cabinet war room, the one at Storey's Gate. That's their air raid warning post. Or the exchange which was at their air raid warning post. And there are some others. Most of them, they're just meaningless letters, but if you'd like to have a look, please do. A big hole in the ground and building it. It cost about £250,000 at 1940s prices, which is about £10.5 million today. So they weren't playing. And the other bunkers around here, of which there were several, made a seat of government. One of the reasons why they chose Willesden was there are a great many schools around here, and the idea was that all the civil servants that would be supporting, okay, there's 150 people down here, but to actually do anything in the outside world, you need a lot of other people to take your decisions forward. And so the plan was to use all of the evacuated schools around here for various departments. And I pulled something out of a book just yesterday. The suburban scheme, empty schools for 1,400 civil servants. The remainder would have gone off to the West Midlands, apparently. But for those of you who are local, there were schools at Gibbons Road, Furnace Road and Leopold Road. Anyone know those? I think they're primary schools. They would have taken 700 from external affairs, and Willesden County in Doyle Gardens and Pound Lane, a further 500 from the Treasury and Cabinet Office. Because all the children here were evacuated at the beginning of the war, although during the Phoney War, many of them came back briefly. Right, as I said, this is a, we think it was used as a rehearsal space in 9 club. This here, they're acid impervious. In fact, they're impervious to everything. You find them all over the military estate, and they're used wherever you've got oil, petrol, lubricants, acid, anything that might spill and be difficult to clean up. That's one. The second is, you'll notice we're in a very close space. Down here, yeah, no doors, no windows. There are these little holes at the top. There's one there, and there's one there. The door behind you, which the builders might notice has no lintel, was cut later, I presume was to replace individual cells. But they have boxes like this, and they're full of lead plates and sulfuric acid. So the reason for all of this keeping it in is because sulfuric acid, if any of you have ever been silly enough to try sniffing your car battery, is a very, very noxious substance. And also, when they're under charge or under load, batteries bleed off hydrogen at the anode and oxygen at the cathode, if I remember correctly, which is a highly explosive mix. So you tend to keep it quite controlled. And that's why this room is like this. So we're going to go out through the new door.